Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise podcast, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity and making meaning. We're sort of on to our third and final part of our sort of three-part series on living with ME, long COVID, chronic illness and cancer. And through a mutual friend of the podcast, Eliza Charlie, we've met Oonagh Carr. And Oonagh has been living with long COVID, ME, and has also been living with cancer. So it's yeah. How do you describe yourself, Una, as a description?
Well, thanks first of all for having me on, Daniel, to share my story, and to Eliza also for introducing us. So I suppose right now, my life is very much centered around family, close friends, my doctors, communities of people that I never really expected to be part of, long COVID, ME, CFS communities, and more recently the breast cancer survivors groups. My life pre chronic illness, so pre 2020, kind of bears no resemblance at all to how it looks now. And that's not all bad, and I'll explain that later. But I guess pre March 2020, I was, you know, very active, fit, hardworking, a communications manager in finance. We were a busy household, and I live in Dublin in Ireland, and my husband was commuting to London, so I was solo
Wow.
parenting during the week as well as working full time, and running and doing a bit of Pilates and generally staying fit, juggling a lot of balls. And as a family, we travelled and socialised and really enjoyed our lives. And I didn't give my health a second thought. Wasn't on any medication. I was really healthy and happy. And then March 2020 hit, and my husband and I were both sick, and he recovered after about 6 weeks, and then I took a lot longer, and I really haven't. I really haven't recovered, unfortunately, like many of us. And yes, I mean, as you'll know, that's the really difficult part, because it's that acceptance, is trying to live with the fact that there's no real end in sight. There's lots of different pieces
Yeah.
of research, but they're quite disjointed at the moment. And so I suppose what's helped me, my life's work now, is just to seek answers and do a lot of my own research with the bit of energy that I have every day. um, which isn't a huge amount, as you'll be well aware of. But it's been helped enormously by community groups like in 2020, where nobody really understood long COVID. I mean, I went back to work after a 10-week period of being very ill.
Wow.
And I thought that was, a huge amount of time to be sick. And
Yeah.
I kind of checked myself back into work that summer of 2020, but I was really unwell. I mean, I was basically, as a comms manager, my job is talking and communicating and, bringing people together, coming up with ideas, and on Zoom all day, because we were still sort of semi-locked down, certainly in Ireland at that point. And I mean, it actually was my line manager sort of intervened at the end of the summer and said, Duna, you're not as sharp as you usually are, and your voice, my throat was like, my voice was very throaty, and I wasn't really getting my points across in a crisp way, and it was devastating, and my cognitive function was really declining as well, and I was just exhausted, and I had this constant sternum pain as well that was I had gone to various specialists about, and I was told it's deconditioning, a
Yeah.
favorite word of mine,
Yeah.
being sarcastic, but deconditioning, and post-viral, and not to worry, and just
Yeah.
breathe deeply. And then when that didn't subside, I was signed off work, and I actually asked for quite a lot of investigations to be done. And it turned out I had myocarditis and some heart swelling as well. Some heart fluid pericarditis
Mm.
and impaired lung function as a direct result of the virus itself.
Wow.
So at that point, I knew I was in, very serious illness category, but ostensibly looked fine, to the outside
Mm.
world, and I think that was, and I know that is something we all struggle with too because it's so invisible. And I suppose that I'll go back to the fact that, besides obviously that I had a lot of support with family and friends, and I was very lucky to attend a long COVID clinic. I found the people that probably helped most in that position were people like me who were part of these communities online. Um, and I suppose my quest for recovery took me to Germany. I went to Germany and had apheresis done, which is a type of dialysis, and I
Wow.
was diagnosed with microclots.
Mm.
I looked at even going to the US more recently for treatment, but I was unable to do so. I even tried brain retraining, which had worked
Hmm.
for some in some ways, but I was never really getting to the heart of what was happening within my body. And the long COVID clinic, the doctor has been amazing, and he deals with symptom management rather than, he's as he said himself, without proper research and without studies, and he's put forward ideas for clinical trials, but they need to be even at a national level supported, at a governmental level, and might be controversial, but I don't think there's much political capital in looking at long COVID.
Mm.
Unfortunately, COVID is just kind of a dirty word, and I think people like to move on from it. They talk about it like it's in the past.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's sort of where I was until last year, March
Yeah.
23, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was huge shock. It was I was going for I was actually found something myself in my breast, and I thought I'd get it checked. My GP said it's unlikely to be anything, there's no family history, and went along, and unfortunately it was grade 2, stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma with lymph node involvement, which meant it was quite a serious cancer and had to be treated quite radically because I was relatively young, in my late 40s, and I had chemotherapy, 20 rounds of radiation, some surgery. And at this point, I was reaching, sadly, I was reaching a point with the long COVID where my daily functioning, my energy envelope, let's say, had
Mm.
expanded a little. My lung function, so the exchange of oxygen around my body was only at 50% after COVID. And it had gone up to 69% by the time we'd reached sort of February 23.
Mm.
And then post the chemo and radiation and all of the treatment, it's dropped right back down again to 60. So um,
Wow.
it's had, I mean, we can see in black and white that it's had an adverse effect on me, but all throughout the treatment, I had this extra layer of complication because I had to educate some of the medics who were treating my cancer,
Mm.
um, and who again would look at me and think, "Well, she's fine, and her heart function seems fine," and I think the problem is until we have proper diagnostic tools, we're not really going to be able to we won't be represented. We won't. There'll be no
Mm.
way of actually proving what's actually going on under the surface. Um, so that was, I suppose, the biggest challenge, and my treatment had to be adapted in order to not cause further damage to heart and lungs. Um, so that was, difficult too because I found myself having to explain
Mm.
to say oncology nurses who were fantastic by the way, but who had varying degrees of interest or, empathy, depending on who
Yeah.
you spoke to. Um, Whereas with the cancer diagnosis, I mean, I said to my husband, it's a kind of dark humor, but it felt like it was a funeral home at one point because I had so many flowers in the house,
Yeah.
and people reach out and they're leaving lasagnas at the door, and everyone was absolutely amazing. The support was unbelievably good. Um, but what made me kind of sad was, on some of my bad days with long COVID, honestly, it's just as devastating and as crushing
Mm.
fatigue wise as post chemo. Um,
Mm.
and if people understood the devastation of that fatigue, I think, I suppose I'd love for that to be understood more. And more than that, I'd love just to be able to get to the point where people actually take it seriously enough to put the research in place in a serious way and bring some good minds together. And I know there's lots of work happening, and I
Mm.
don't want to minimize that, but I just think we can do better,
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. There's
Yeah.
so there's so much to unpack from that
Yes,
story,
I'm
isn't there? Because
sorry. I've
it's like,
just sort
no,
of
no, like
dumped it all on you.
it just feels like how was that kind of like that experience of kind of living through the COVID, long COVID, and then suddenly just sort of discovering you've got cancer on top? Does it just feel like, oh, the world's against you, or did it just feel like,
I did.
how did you feel about that? Because
I
it must have
did.
felt like, well, like,
I
and now what? Like,
I did. I sort of said, God, have I done something really bad in a past life?
yeah.
Someone is really testing me here. Um, I suppose the one thing is I had learned to slow down. I was very much a person who was all about fast pace, new experiences.
Mm.
My husband and I, we lived in France and we got married in Paris, and then we lived in London for 10 years and
Wow.
came back to Dublin. So we were kind of always on the go, new jobs, new experiences. And to go from sort of my life just got smaller, if you like. But
Mm.
luckily for me, I really like my family. And that was a good thing, um, because we were spending so much time. And then with the lockdowns that ensued, I mean, I was very ill when I look back now, because they
Mm.
really didn't bother me in the least. In that sense, I was so exhausted and sick. Um, so when the cancer came, I had, like I was saying earlier, I had recovered somewhat. I was getting to the point where I was functioning like nowhere near my old um, functional ability. Or, sorry, it's my brain fog now. I can't
That's fine.
always express myself too well, um, but I was in a better space. So yeah, it was shocking. It was upsetting. I would say now it's almost harder because again the treatment's over. When you're in active treatment,
Mm.
it's sort of your job. You're to just go in, relax. There's sort of a rhythm to the whole thing. You go in for treatment, you come home, you know that in 2 weeks' time there's another round of chemo. There's lots of interaction with your medical team. Now it's harder because I'm out the other side, but I've been further debilitated. Um, and meanwhile, I'm in sort of a breast cancer survivors survive and thrive group, which has been fantastic. But I'm watching these women literally, get better and better as the
Yeah.
months go by, and I'm
Mm.
not getting there at all, which makes total sense given what's
Mm.
going on. But that's been really hard. So I have been, I've part of my recovery is actually seeing a counsellor and psychotherapist to help with that. And pacing is a huge thing because I definitely feel, and I haven't cracked it yet. So
Mm. No, I
I
don't think
don't.
anybody can really. Some people better at it
It's
than others.
holy grail stuff, And my long COVID doctor said, on a good day, just do what you do on a bad day. And I said, that's just it actually impossible for me because once I have a good day,
Mm.
which is a rarity, I will. I'll go for it. You know, I'll really
Yeah.
just try and milk the life out of the day. And I suppose that's where I've some learning to do still, you know, and I find that difficult. I think that's the hardest piece. So
Mm.
yeah, I just try to, again, when that happens, I'll often just reach out to some of the people in the same boat as I am, and we help each other through those moments, you know.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's
I
tough.
find that it's sometimes it feels harder to have a better day because you know you've got to try and manage that, and that is so difficult to try and manage your energy
Yes,
levels when you just want, like you say, you just kind of sort of like want to prove to yourself that you can do things because you feel like, oh, am I,
exactly.
you sort of second guessing yourself and things, aren't you? And yeah, it's
Exactly. And I think especially when life, as life does, you know, and family life and just being a human being and having work to do in life, it's there are always things, there are always things on the horizon, and it's that feeling of, oh my goodness, how am I going to, you're making deals with yourself all the time. How am I going to get
mm,
through this event or this social occasion and not crash 2 days later, when I'll need to be ready for this? And so it does mean saying no
mm,
to quite a
mm,
lot. Even I even find just phone calls very tiring. I find, you know, I can't read. I used to be a voracious reader. I don't read half as much as I used to read. I listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to a lot of content, but I find that, you know, to really calm myself down, I need to just almost lie in a dark room.
mm-hmm,
And, you know, we don't always have that luxury, I guess, you know, because life goes on.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it's a daily battle, really, you know, and I think most of the time I cope quite well, a fairly good outlook on things. But what I find tough is when I'm sort of propelled back in time, like I was in, I hadn't been back to London in years, and I went back to London in February, and I was in Heathrow and I just burst out crying. And
mm,
I was with my husband and he said, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" And I said, "You know, no, the last time I was here, I was hauling like, you know, 25 kilo bag and I had,
mm,
you know, the kids with me and they were much younger and we were flying through the airport and, you know, it didn't even occur to me that that was tired. It didn't even enter my head
no,
that, and yet I was absolutely finished. I was rolling a little 8 kilo bag. My husband had the rest on his shoulders, and I was out of breath by the time we got to the Uber. And I thought, wow, you know, this is, you know, this is it. This is bad, you know. And I think on a day to day basis. You just keep going and try not to look back in time. But I think when you put back in time like that,
yeah,
so
yeah,
you know, it can be tough. Yeah. Mm.
yeah. I occasionally still dream about being at work, and that's a really strange thing because then you wake up and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, and then it's like you've been back in that place or back in those sort of environments, and you just
Yes.
think, wow.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sometimes like when you dream about like sometimes in my dreams I'm kind of like ill, but other
Yeah.
times I'm not ill, and then it's like when you have a dream when you're not ill, and then you wake up and it's like, whoa, and then the grief hits you
Yeah.
again, doesn't it? Just from like
It is
waking up, which is
grief. You're
ridiculous.
so right. That is the
Yeah.
perfect word for it. It is grief, actually, I've I found the cancer support groups really good in that regard because they're very well established and um I've attended some of the, you know, programs that have been run. One of them was designed by Stanford University, and we did a lot of grief work actually. And the big takeaway was, you know, you're not the same person. It's
Mm.
and striving to be that person that you were before is just going to end up being um, just net unhelpful. And you know, you have to almost embrace who you are now and
Mm.
take the good that has come out of it. And I do feel, you know, at least life has slowed down for me. Life was extremely busy. I definitely have more family time. I definitely have more time with friends, my parents. You know, it's richer from that point of view.
Mm.
Uh, but there's no doubt that the frustration is still there, that things aren't moving as fast as I'd like them to.
Mm.
And now, obviously, cancer, that added layer, there's always that fear of recurrence. Quite a number of people have actually asked the question, do you think it was maybe caused by COVID? And I mean, that's another thing. My brain
Wow.
can't
Yeah.
even go there. But
Yeah.
you know, um, but no, I think cancer is one of those things that's very difficult to put your finger on what has actually caused it,
Yeah.
and it's not helpful either to go into that too deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
What
it's
you mentioned earlier about like almost having to kind of educate doctors about your long COVID. Do you
mm-hmm,
want to tell us a little bit more about that? But how was that
mm-hmm,
kind of going in? Because it must have felt like I can't quite imagine now like having to go in and staying in a hospital situation because it,
mm-hmm,
it it feels just very exhausting sort of environment to be in the first place,
mm-hmm,
doesn't it? With living
mm-hmm.
with ME or long COVID, so that
Yeah,
must have been a challenge. And then trying to educate doctors
yeah.
about the impact of that environment on you, it must have been really
Yes, I
challenging.
mean, there was one story. It actually upset me so much at the time, but I think God, it's almost kind of comical, really now. And was before the surgery. I met with the anaesthetist in a sort of um, a pre-assessment situation. So he had to ask me questions. And in fairness to my oncologist, she had said, "Look, Una, I really, given the long COVID, I really want him to have a chat with you, so that we're doing everything
Mm.
right." But he just saw me as a waste of his time, and he basically said, "So can you list the medications you're on?" And I'm on quite a lot of medication because part of my long COVID symptom kind of profile is POTS, and I
Mm.
take heart medication. I take low dose naltrexone, which is sort of, as you'll know probably from other people that have been on the podcast, that it's sort of like a wonder drug. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's working pretty well. I'm on various different things, and the anaesthetist sort of said, "Well, why are you on the naltrexone?" And I said, "Well, it's something that tends to be working quite well for my long COVID symptoms." And he was very perplexed by that.
Mm.
Um, and then he said, "Well, now after this, you should be able to. The main thing is just to get up and back on your feet and back, exercising and getting kind of your heart rate going and your cardio strength." And I said, "Well, no. I mean, that's kind of in direct opposition to what I've been told to do with long COVID." And he looked at me and said, "Who on earth told you not to exercise? What kind of,
Mm.
I just thought, really, am I actually having this conversation with this guy?" And I said, "Look, it's a difficult one to understand." And I was so exhausted actually that I just refused to get into anything too deep with him. Um,
Mm.
but he's an example of somebody, very senior level in medicine, who just didn't get it, but also didn't want to. Um,
Yeah.
Whereas I've had largely positive experiences, to be honest. There was another. I had to go to urgent care because I had the tachycardia was so bad one day, and my cardiologist that treats me, who's excellent, he had said, "Please go to urgent care if you're finding that it's just it's not being controlled by the drug." And went in, and of course, again, the ECGs, they're normal. They're normal. I mean, the
Mm.
results are usually fine. And the cardiologist just said, "Your heart's better than mine." Almost like, "What are you doing here?" And it's just so upsetting because you know you make question your own, what is a very complex illness.
Yeah.
Um, but on the whole, educating, and I'm just actually giving you the examples where it went wrong. But actually, on the whole, the oncology team, for instance, were very interested in how the various chemo drugs were affecting me, and actually one of them was a doctor who was a senior reg who was kind of learning how this would impact me. And he was very interested. He'd sit down and go, okay, um, you're not getting along with these drugs. And I wasn't. And the thing is, I
Mm.
was finding my temperature was soaring 2 days after, but they couldn't find any evidence of infection. So what they decided afterwards was it must be the long COVID that's actually just
Mm.
creating an immune response here that we've never seen before. So there was a curiosity there. So that was good. I think when that
Mm.
happens, yeah, you don't feel quite as oh, it's a terrible feeling. It's hard to describe. You don't feel like you're
Mm.
wasting time, somebody's time, or being
It's your own reality being
alarmist.
questioned, isn't it? You sort of,
It's your reality being
yeah.
questioned, which is it's just awful.
Mm.
And then so I suppose my own GP, she's been learning a lot from me because I just come with all this information to her anytime I see her, and she's interested. But her, as she said herself, my hands are tied. I can't prescribe blood thinners. I can't prescribe, none of this is under any nice guidelines yet. So we have to just work with what we're allowed to do. And,
Mm.
um, but at least if there's a curiosity there, and
Mm.
there's a will to get you better, then it's that's a positive thing, but it's really
Mm.
difficult because 4 years on, it's still pretty poorly understood, you know.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And it is that sort of frustration, isn't it, where you sort of and I guess particularly with long COVID, and we haven't focused an
Mm-hmm.
awful lot on long COVID on the podcast, and it's something we need to do more really. And it's
Mm-hmm.
learning sort of the things that are unique to long COVID, but then the
Mm-hmm.
things that are kind of like from a wider perspective, kind of like a very much like ME type sort of things with the, like you say, the
Yeah.
post-exertional malaise and things like that
Yes.
that
Yeah.
impact.
I think
Mm.
long COVID, for me, I think it's just for everybody. It's just so complex in terms of the the symptom profile. Like, I mean, the long COVID doctor I tend said, it tends to start as a respiratory piece and then ends up going upwards,
Mm.
and ending with very severe neuro um, symptoms that are extremely debilitating. And certainly that's the kind of pathway it took with me. And he would say that was typical of, he's several thousand people now that he sees, and he said that's what he has seen. But what I find is the specialists themselves, I mean, thank goodness they're there and they're doing the work they're doing, but you know, they're quite attached to their own thesis as to why this is happening, and not necessarily always open to what somebody else feels. And what would be great is to see the thing as, holistically, and
Mm.
work together maybe as a multidisciplinary team, or um, because it's kind of maddening in a way as the patient, especially when you're pursuing treatment, and which is costly, and costly from a financial sense, but also there's an emotional cost to it as well,
Mm.
because there's that hope you have that this will be the thing, this will
Yeah.
get me there, um, and yet you'll speak to another specialist a month later, he'll say, "Oh no, that's nonsense. It's not caused by that at all." Um, so that's been very tough. But I keep
Mm.
having to say, look, it's new. I'm learning a lot about the medical world, and my sister's a doctor too, and the training isn't there. They don't like
Mm.
Emmy. Emmy has been with us for a very, very long time, and that it's kind of, it's beggars belief that still hasn't been cracked properly. You
Mm.
know, um, and and again, I think it's difficult because from an employer's perspective, it's probably kind of a nuisance to have these sort of vaguely, these illnesses that are not properly understood, and then what do you do with that, and how do you rehabilitate the person, and there's so much that could be done in that space. So
Mm.
I gotten to know a lot of people in that area, and yeah, we've so much in common. Um, and then of course there's they're so knowledgeable. That a lot of that knowledge is being passed on, and it's fantastic. So certainly on the pacing side of things, and even on the emotional side, there's some people I've met that have provided so much comfort to me. So yeah, uh, I feel like the cancer will be behind me, and I'll be able to move on with my life. But long COVID is very, very different. I think,
Mm.
yeah, I don't have as much hope, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the shocking thing for most people outside of this world, because
Mm.
cancer is such a scary word and prospect for so many, and yet actually for me, it's there's a certain pathway, there's a certain way, there's so much research out there, so many resources. I've utter faith in the whole system, but not with long COVID, you know. So
And I think
it's,
what you said earlier about was really poignant in the sense of
mm,
the all the people that you've kind of gone through the same process with at a similar time. You're
mm,
seeing them kind of moving on with their life, and
yes, yeah,
and then you sort of just like, well, actually, you're still back at square one in a way, aren't you?
yes,
That
yes.
must feel really like
That's
frustrating.
really, really tough. Actually, one of them did a half marathon, and I thought, my goodness, like a half marathon, that is just oh, I'm getting balloons in the background. I'm not sure why.
If you're
uh,
listening on the if you're listening on the podcast, there's some balloons just appeared.
interesting. Um, yeah, so I suppose that for anybody who finds themselves in the same position, my heart goes out to you. And all I would say is, try and as best as you can to advocate for yourself, because um, these cancer treatments are, by their nature, extremely toxic, and they're going to undo any work, any good progress that you've made, and that's just the nature of the beast, really. But it's so important to try and minimize harm, especially if you've had any organ damage as a result of long COVID. But even apart from that, it just to make your medical team aware, I think, of everything, and don't hold back, and don't let anybody make you feel small, you know. Um, and I found that was, I mean, there's certain people, there's Jasmine Dinger, who's written the Long COVID Handbook, and he's got his own YouTube channel. He's fantastic. So even I came equipped with a bit of, just a few stats or a bit of data, and if you're not feeling in that strong enough, to ask your loved ones, somebody to help you and sit beside you in those meetings, because, like I said, the level of knowledge or intellectual curiosity even about it varies depending on who you're talking to. You know.
And I think one of the extra challenges must be for you to really take on board what's being said in terms of information, and then like processing that information and learning about what you
Mhm.
need to learn about for the cancer when you've got the kind of
Yes.
cognitive dysfunction of the long code or ME
Oh
sort of
my
sitting there.
goodness,
That must have
exactly.
been a
That
challenge.
was really challenging. So, writing everything down, my husband came along to appointments, and he heard things I had not heard, and you think you're going crazy. And he said, no, this, but that's, you absolutely have to have that for sure. Um, and, I think the other piece is exercise was kind of a big part of my life. I mean, I loved to exercise. I wasn't an athlete or anything like it, but I loved to do a bit of running, and I just race around everywhere naturally. And it does seem to be something that's promoted actively by, I mean there's a reason for it. It's fantastic. And not being able to do that is just, it's really tough. That's just not in my plan, and it can't be for now. So and that is tough. That is really hard. I definitely miss that, and I know that it would make it. It's so good even for your mind. But look, as I said, I'm trying to find way. Every day is a bit of a challenge or a battle, depending on the day. Um, so, and I'm learning to read the cues now. When my body has had enough, and I'm just almost there. I don't quite get to bust anymore. I'm kind of able to rein myself in a little bit.
Mm,
So that's probably a good thing, you know? Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, it's trying to manage the little things in life, isn't it? That
Yes.
sort of on a day to day basis, that's such a big challenge, isn't it? And
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. For
yeah,
everybody. Yeah.
yeah,
But look,
yeah.
I'm lucky in lots of ways too, and I have a good team around me, a medical team, and I have good friends and family that understand only because I've made sure they understand. You know,
Mm,
and I definitely there's a huge value in the social media, the communities online. Even if you're not naturally just inclined to seek help from groups like that, and you have to be quite discerning. But once you find a good one, my goodness, they're fantastic. They're worth their
mm,
weight in gold.
mm,
You know.
mm. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, it's been really good to talk. Was there anything else that you wanted to sort of share before we finish today?
Um, I don't think so. I think you know, I just love to, uh, stay in touch, and hopefully, we can all look forward to some breakthroughs. We
Yeah,
have to stay positive and
yeah,
have to
yeah,
stay. I suppose my role, I kind of see my role now as helping people, others understand, and as I say, I have a lot more empathy for people going through ME and chronic fatigue, and my heart goes out to them. So, yeah, I think try to stay positive and stick together, and hopefully, with enough of this kind of advocacy, it'll make a difference.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think just sharing stories, I think that's been so important. And thank you for
Yes.
sharing yours today, because
No,
I
pleasure.
think just hearing other people's stories, and kind of, we still get we did a whole series about grief, like
Mm,
last year, and that was
mm,
so helpful for so many people. And like we're still
mm.
getting like comments now on the videos and stuff, sort of saying, oh, thank you, that's, it's been really helpful. So I
Oh, that's
think just
great.
sharing your story, and thank you for sharing yours. And it's been
No, I'm happy
a,
to.
a
Happy
great
to.
a great time to just chat. So yeah,
Yeah, and just I guess be careful of, make sure you're not forgetting other health issues like cancer. I suppose that would be
mm,
the kind of an obvious one to think about as well.
mm,
To make sure that you're doing all of the checking, and that you're seeing a doctor if you've anything that doesn't seem quite right. So
yeah,
yeah,
it is true, isn't it? That so often you
mm,
can kind of like think, because like even now, like I've been
mm,
living with ME for like coming up
mm.
7 years. Is it? I lose track.
Oh
It will be
goodness,
7 years. But even now, it's like I'll get new symptoms, and I'm thinking, oh, I've not had this before,
yeah,
and you just can often dismiss symptoms, can't you? Because it's just, oh, well, it's just
absolutely.
an evolution of the ME.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. No, and I mean, if one person listening, you know, gets checked, I'll feel better. I mean, the only reason I went was a friend of mine had been diagnosed, and so I think it's so, so important. It's critical,
Mm,
really. Yeah. But
mm,
but thank you, Daniel, and all the work you do, and with more people like you,
yeah,
it'd be
yeah.
better. We'd be in a better space, I think.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
thanks for sharing. It's been good.
not at all.
So,
Yeah,
okay, well,
pleasure.
it's been brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks so much.